Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I am one of your hosts, Aaron.
And I'm your other host, Zach.
And I'm going to hit the erstwhile one more time. Neither of us are erstwhile, huzzah! I think I can let that one die now. So, before we jump into the main topic of the day, as always, we would like to extend a hearty thank you to everybody who has stuck with us, returning listeners who've either dipped in and out or been with us since the beginning. Your support means the world to us. And hey, if you're new to the show, we love you too. It's wonderful to have you aboard, and hopefully you enjoy your time with us. If all of you collectively would not mind too terribly following us on your platform of choice and also sharing us on your platform of choice, or as I coined the term last episode, hit the engagement button, which seems just general enough to work. That is, of course, our best way to grow, and the only way that we can land in front of some more ears. That seems like a strange way to put it, but it also is somewhat accurate. So yeah, share us with, as we always like to say, a dear friend, a mortal enemy, a fresh acquaintance, a stranger on the bus. Dare I hope someone near you in the election booth. Well, this is going to come out after Election Day, so that's probably a moot point. But yeah, share us around, and we really appreciate it.
Agreed. And this week, we've got a spicy topic for all of you. And by that, I mean...
habanero peppers. What are they all about?
What are they? Well, it's actually ghost peppers. I was watching a thing recently where Moist Critical, for those that know who that is, Charlie, down in Florida. Not to be confused with Charlie XCX. That's very different. But anyway, they were doing
Charlie Day.
Or Charlie Day, yeah. They were doing this like the Spice is Right, where you guess what the Scoville is of like different spicy things, and they brought out these peppers. And Charlie immediately to everyone was like, "Oh, I know what those are. Those are habaneros. I know what the Scoville is." And they were like Ghost Reapers instead. So everybody bit into it thinking it was a habanero.
Yeah, that
and
probably
you just
did not
immediately
go great.
watched everyone's regret. It was kind of funny.
We should do a challenge like that.
No, I'm good. I've done enough of I did like the hot chocolate once. It was disgusting. It's bad for my guts. I don't need that in my life. On a serious note, this week we are talking about something that I was passionate about after watching the recently released Adam Conover interview with Jason Schreier. I believe that's episode 283. It came out shortly after Jason Schreier released his new book, Play Nice, which Aaron and I are both reading as well.
Yeah, I'm like 70 pages from the end because Jason Schreier writes highly interesting and supremely digestible books. So I've been tearing through it as of late.
Yeah, it's a very good book for anyone that wants to pick it up. I think he does a really good job of going over some relatively dense topics in a way that's pretty easy for anybody to understand.
Absolutely. It's also worth noting that you don't have to be a Blizzard diehard, because the book is called Play Nice, The Rise, Fall, and Future of Blizzard Entertainment. Which I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you know Blizzard is obviously the creators of StarCraft, Warcraft, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Hearthstone, all of those titles. But you don't have to be intimately familiar with those at all in order to get a lot out of the book.
Yeah.
And that's enough plugging for Jason Schreier on this episode.
Well, no, I was just going to say the most complicated thing about finding the book is if you decide to go to a Barnes & Noble, they actually reference this in the interview. Barnes & Noble has it next to like Minecraft books and D&D when it really should be in the business section. He specifically brings this out in the conversation. So it's kind of
Which was
funny.
Hysterical because I watched the episode of Adam Conover's podcast is called Factually. Which he doesn't need our publicity time, but it is called Factually. And I picked up the book before I watched the interview, and I went into Barnes & Noble straight to the business section trying to find the book, and I'm like, I can't find it anywhere. So I'm like trying to find various nonfiction sections. I'm like, maybe it's in history? That seems kind of strange, but sure. And yeah, no, it was over next to like Minecraft players guides, which was bonkers. And then to hear him reference that was kind of a fun full circle moment, because I can't say I feel all of his pain, because I'm sure that has to some degree impacted sales and credibility, but I at least experienced the second or third hand frustration.
Yeah. Well, to your point, aside from all of the strangeness around us trying to get the book and glazing up Jason Schreier, he had this conversation with Adam Conover, and there was one thing in the conversation towards the end of it that I thought was particularly interesting. And it's when they were talking about specifically kind of the bad state of the gaming industry when it comes to console sales. And specifically, the part that I thought was interesting is this idea that Grand Theft Auto 6 could be the super game that will, air quotes, save us all. And basically, I believe the phrase that Adam Conover uses is the, what is it, a wave that raises all ships or whatever it is? I'm trying to look for it.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm embarrassed. It's a pretty common, rising tides lift all ships. It's a very common phrase, and I couldn't remember it. But regardless, there's this idea that it will basically cause people to finally upgrade from the last gen of consoles, which of course was the PS4 and the Xbox One, to either an Xbox Series X or S or the PlayStation 5.
Yeah. The gist of it in a very sort of top down sort of view. This conversation I actually started seeing crop up in advance of the overall hardware picture, was surrounding the PS5 Pro, where the system itself does not seem to have any sort of killer selling point, right? Like, it's not like the haptics are improved on the DualSense controller, and most of the games shown off for the PS5 Pro showcase were last-gen titles that had been, remastered or ported to PS5 with upgrades and stuff like that. And it left a lot of people, both in sort of the journalistic spaces and just like in general on the internet, scratching their heads as to why anyone would need to pick this particular piece of hardware up. And it was around that time that I started seeing a lot of people start to speculate that the real reason to buy a PS5 Pro is so you can hit 60 FPS 4K on GTA 6, right? Like, you're going to play GTA 6 in the best fidelity possible on console, which is to say at launch, because to the best of my knowledge, it won't support PC at launch because Rockstar games have historically not, for whatever reason. And that kind of got tamped down pretty quickly by some people at Rockstar, describing the fact that no, it's a very complicated simulation. It's not going to have that degree of fidelity and performance on a PS5 Pro, which then, the conversation eventually morphed. And I'm sure it was happening in much more intellectual circles behind the scenes during that time anyway, into GTA 6 being this large, it will be the shepherd of people from old hardware to new hardware. And we thought it might be kind of interesting to dig into some of the nitty gritty of that perception or that idea, both in the pros, cons, the concept of it, and why it might be true, might be a flawed sort of idea to carry with you.
Well, I mean, I can definitely say that based on some of the, research I have done, it seems like there is some hope probably from executives that this GTA 6 release is going to increase sales. I think probably what's useful is just to, go over some of the information that we were talking about. So there's a few things you're able to find online, one of which is just a discussion around lifetime sales. I think that's probably a good place to start when it comes to PlayStation specifically. Xbox has been losing the console race for a while now, so we're not going to focus as much on them. We're going to focus more on PlayStation.
Trying to include Xbox hardware sales over the last 2 generations is a really sort of flawed metric, because the Xbox One obviously did not live up to the Xbox 360 sort of expectations are set by the Xbox 360. And the Series X and S have been so wildly inconsistent for their entire time on the market that those numbers are wonky. So we're kind of sticking to PlayStation here.
And that was specifically the one called out in the interview as well. So our hope was there'd be some more numbers. Unfortunately, there are some. There's some kind of weird, napkin math that's going on. Yeah. But what's interesting, we brought this up before we pressed the magical record button. So if you look at lifetime sales relative to the amount of time that the consoles have been out, the PS5 and the PS4, I was looking roughly at the 3 to 4 year mark. And if you look at the lifetime sales starting at around 4 years for the PS5, we're sitting at about 61.7 million units sold. What's interesting about that is if you compare that to the PS4 at around 4 years, it's sitting at about 60 million units sold. And so obviously we've got a delta of around 1.7 million units, which is a lot of units. But if you're talking about a company as big as Sony, and this is what we were actually talking about before we hit the record button, they're going to want bigger growth than that. They're not going to want the new console to sell as well as the PlayStation 4. They are going to want it to massively surpass the PlayStation 4. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Sony is looking at that 1.7 million lead over the PS4 and looking at it as largely being kind of a failure. The one thing I will mention, because it's super easy to forget, COVID and just manufacturing issues did lead to a roughly 6-month shortage of chips that definitely impacted console sales. For the article I found, like I said, it said 6 months. I feel like it was over a year.
I would say well over a year.
Yeah, I feel like the new consoles for well over a year. And obviously that also negatively impacted Xbox as well, not just PlayStation. It's you said it's sitting basically flat, which it is, which is kind of crazy when you're talking about 1.7 million units. That's so many units. But
yeah, that's a lot of boxes, man. So, I mean, obviously the growth expectations we can only really speculate at, because I don't think Sony has much interest in putting forth what their specific, I mean, they can set sales goals and those can be made public and whatnot, but I don't think that they're going to necessarily share their internal logic for why consistent, if modest, growth is not necessarily living up to their expectations. But the general consensus is that this current generation of hardware, by which I mean the PS5 and the modern Xboxes, are not selling as well as the companies behind them would have hoped. And I think there are a lot of factors at play there. I think some of them are actually pretty relevant to the discussion. I know we'd kind of, I think, anticipated jumping into these a little bit later, but I feel like if we're just looking at the numbers, contextualizing them might be sort of valuable. Zach, do you agree?
Well, I would just say, to further, before you bring up that point, it's probably beneficial to mention that not only are these sales down, but apparently, and we weren't able to find this graphic, but there's apparently a graphic that was released by Sony directly that shows of their almost, I think it was like 96 million users on PlayStation, about equal parts are playing the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5. not only that, people are playing the PlayStation 5 more than the PlayStation 4, which means Sony's going to want to move people over to the PlayStation 5 because there's a direct correlation between money spent and time played when it comes to games. And so I think that logic would apply to console as well, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And the money spent and time played correlation is increasingly valuable as a metric because, as we all know, games are no longer packaged products that that are sold, completed, and then, your sales of the game drive the revenue for that. Most of the games that are making huge amounts of money are doing so with the understanding that they will be supported for, years to come, with additional content. So yeah, I think that metric is probably, specifically the figure showing that people are about evenly split between spending time on their PS5 and PS4 is concerning to them. And I think it's probably worth addressing the Fortnite in the room to some degree.
Well, the Fortnite, the Roblox.
Yeah. I synthesize it all into Fortnite because it's all kind of the same thing to me. But yeah, one of the biggest drivers of this particular issue is, of course, these low system requirement so-called black hole games that the non-gaming populace still sinks hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours into, and of course millions to billions of dollars into every year. And the reality of the situation is that these games are supremely playable on last gen hardware. There is absolutely, outside of some fidelity updates and improved load times, there's essentially no reason to buy a $500 box that's new just to play the same Fortnite, because content itself in Roblox, Fortnite, and Minecraft are not gated depending on which generation you're playing on, right? It's not like more ambitious features have been released for the newer hardware, or new game modes are only coming to new hardware. One of the appeals of this particular ilk of game is that the experience is largely comparable regardless of what platform you're playing on. So if people are spending an insane amount of time in these games are driving profits for most every single company that has one up in their portfolio, and they're driving to some degree hardware sales for a company like Sony that doesn't have one of these enormous giga games in its first party development pipeline. They're really looking for any reason to rip people off of the old hardware and into the new hardware ecosystem, because even if they're not going to be getting the royalties on Fortnite, they can at least get the hardware sales from the people who want to play it. And at the moment, there's just no compelling reason for, especially families with young players in them, to buy that new $500 box.
Yeah. And just we did an episode where we talked a little bit about Fortnite, but specifically to kind of put context behind some of these player bases. There were various sources that we used, and granted, they seem to be referencing sources that I trust, so I'm going to go with these numbers, and they don't seem overly untrustworthy. But if we're just looking at actually one of these is from Dexterto. I forgot the way that I linked. It's weird. Okay, so according to Dexterto, we've got about 30 million active users per day playing Fortnite. That's a massive amount of people. And then there's a website called Business of Apps that was referencing Roblox as having over 65 million people that access it daily. So between those two games, you're talking about almost 100 million users. Obviously, there's probably some cross-pollination there so that, it's not purely additive, but we're talking about a massive amount of people spending time in these games that, to your point, Aaron, they don't need to upgrade to play Fortnite. They don't need to upgrade to play Roblox, because these games are not pushing technology to the brink in a way that requires all of these graphical improvements, all of these systems improvements that, like the PS5 Pro, as an example, require you to have. This is kind of bringing up an interesting thing in my mind. It kind of popped in. I didn't have this in the notes, but like the new Ratchet and Clank, and how one of the big things was that, was it the solid state was required in order to run the like sequence changes in that game where you're like hopping between dimensions or whatever. I haven't played the game, so
the same was true of Spider-Man 2 when you're hot swapping between Miles Morales and Peter Parker. Across the map, the load times afforded to that game by the solid state drives were so infinitesimal that people online like accidentally misreported it as having 0 load time, which is technically inaccurate. It's just that it's so much faster because of the SSD.
Well, so the reason I bring that up is those are two games that could not exist on previous consoles that required, or rather utilized, a hard drive. It would not work. The image that the developers were trying to portray, the gameplay they were trying to portray, just wouldn't work. And to your point, that's not a thing with Fortnite. It's not a thing with Roblox. They'll play the same regardless of whether you have a hard drive or an SSD, or whether you've got like the best graphics card or you don't. Like, there's no incentive there. And I don't know how your parents were when you were a kid, right? And also neither of us are parents, but I could assume if you're a parent and you see your child only playing Roblox, Fortnite, and you're even moderately tech savvy, it's like, why am I going to buy my kid a more expensive console when they can play the same goddamn game? Like, if they're just going to play Fortnite, why would I spend, I think the PS5 Pro is $700. I don't know the other PlayStation prices, but why would I spend hundreds of dollars to upgrade? It doesn't make sense to me when my kid is just going to play Fortnite predominantly.
Yeah. And the other, just to kind of plant the seed before we get into the actual GTA of it all, the other game that we have been neglecting to mention in our slew of Minecrafts and Robloxes and Fortnites and whatnot is GTA Online, which is a massively popular mode for the game. Tragically no longer playable on Steam Deck because of some anti-cheat bullshit. But that aside, GTA Online falls into this category as well, where people spend a ton of time and a ton of money playing the GTA Online mode that was packaged in with Grand Theft Auto 5. And again, there is 0 impetus at the moment to upgrade your hardware just to continue playing that game.
Yeah. Which is funny because the game that we are being told in this interview, at least people are kind of viewing as a savior for the games industry, is just going to be another live service that is going to perpetuate the problem that we're talking about, at least until GTA 7 comes out, right? And so I guess the one thing we haven't specifically said is, I think you alluded to it, but we'll just come out and say it. So GTA 6 will not run at all on last-gen consoles. And with the amount of people that care about Grand Theft Auto 6, it will sell consoles. People will upgrade to play this game, unless it ends up somehow doing like a Cyberpunk. I think we talked about the likelihood of that in one of our asides at some point, and we're pretty certain that it's not going to happen. But it's weird to put all of your... It's weird to take that risk. It's weird to take that bet, in my opinion, and say, oh, we'll be fine. GTA 6 will save us, and not proactively do something to help yourself. It's just strange. It's strange to want to take that risk, in my mind. I don't feel comfortable with that.
No, I completely agree. Again, to do numbers context, which is everybody's favorite, GTA 5, as of, I pulled a BBC article, so this numbers are a little bit out of date, but as of September 2023, GTA 5 had sold more than 190 million copies. Woo! Which is insane. And it also held the best opening week sales in video game history, earning, $1.15 billion in 5 days. And that's just on game sales. That's not on, lifetime online sales. That is a $1.15 billion shot in the arm. for a company and an industry. And in this case, the numbers there and the projections for GTA 6 are actually even higher, which, again, really it could come back to bite people in the ass. But if those numbers are accurate, that we're expecting more than 190 million copies of this game to be sold over its lifetime, and, record-crushing opening weekend or week sales, it does start to make sense why people, not that people are, but why people are looking at GTA 6 as the system seller, right? Because if you factor in the cost of a new console, you might see these numbers go down potentially, because GTA 5 released on established hardware, but if people want to play this game badly enough, they will shell out for the new box. And It is finally, to a lot of people, a legitimately compelling reason to shell out for the new box. And I think here in a little bit, we'll kind of dig into some of the other issues as to why current hardware sales may have plateaued to a certain degree, or at least kind of just simply stuck in line with rather than wildly surpassed. But yeah, I mean, GTA 6, by all estimations, is going to be an absolute behemoth of a game. There's very little doubt that it's going to sell. There's very little doubt that it's going to outsell just about every other game on the market. The question is, the questions are to me then, is it wise for the industry to look at this as such a positive thing when the potential for failure is so high, like Zach has said? And B, part of me wonders ultimately who specifically this benefits. I don't know if other games have been hamstrung from reaching fruition because it's like an Xbox Connect thing where they're worried about releasing games exclusively on current gen hardware, because I don't think that has, hampered the sales of games like Spider-Man 2, for instance. The question marks there abound as to who this massive success ultimately, benefits, if not specifically the people who sell the hardware and the people who make GTA. But yeah, I think the idea of a hit-driven market for video games as like a viable revenue creator for these billion-dollar companies that fund video games is one of the reasons that we have found ourselves in the current struggles with the games industry. I think the hit-driven market is not a safe place to be for the industry at large, and it is kind of concerning to see what is probably the most high-profile example of that in the history of the industry receiving so much attention, right? Because this is going to be, if it pans out, the hit to end all hits, right? This is going to be the second coming. This is Skyrim 2,
Electric Boogaloo.
Electric Boogaloo, Electric Scoogaloo, or something, some equally bad joke.
Well, I think the important thing here is, this game, to your point, has a ton of hype. I just looked up the trailer that came out roughly 10 months ago. It's got 217
It's got 2,000 views.
It's only got 2,000 views. It was really bad. 217 million views over 10 months. I'm sure there's numbers you could find on how quickly that went up in the first few days. But point being, people care about this game. But we've been through this path before. We've had companies that were largely trusted to deliver a good product, and they were incredibly hyped games. Cyberpunk, as an example, from CDPR, which after Witcher 3 was, riding high. People thought CDPR could do no wrong. And then, of course, they had Cyberpunk come out, which had a horrendous launch, so bad that, PlayStation had to do a bunch of refunds and took it off of the store for a little bit. And obviously, Cyberpunk has made up for a lot of their mistakes, or rather CDPR has made up for a lot of their mistakes. But the point of this is that these big games are not infallible. GTA 6 will likely be a good game. That being said, we haven't really seen a ton of gameplay from it yet. Now, it doesn't release until fall of 2025. We've still got time to see gameplay footage. We've still got time to see if it looks like a good game. But it could flop. And if it does flop, and the whole games industry is relying on it to really sell hardware, that's a massive issue. That gets rid of one of the biggest incentives that people have to want to jump to new hardware. It immediately just goes away. And people are like, well, that game kind of sucks. And, it'll probably get better if it was to release in a bad state. But that'll still delay when people buy their next PlayStation, Xbox, whatever. Because not everyone's going to buy it immediately.
Right,
I'm sure a lot of people will, but then you might get people refunding consoles. I would not be surprised if people only got a PlayStation 5 to play Grand Theft Auto and then it ended up being bad if they would return it. I could easily believe that being the case.
100%. 100%. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, people, for better and for worse, I think people have a very low bullshit tolerance when it comes to this sort of stuff anymore. And requests for refunds, requests, are granted more frequently. There's a much bigger trend towards that when something is like legitimately egregious, and the backlash to something spirals out of control from being a financial disaster to a PR disaster to being another financial disaster. I mean, Concord is another example of that to some degree. Although I don't think there was an insane amount of backlash to the state of Concord when it came out. It was just that no one gave a shit, which we've already discussed ad nauseum. I think betting it big on one game, it's just a flawed strategy to me, because there's you have one linchpin and everything is relying on that. If there is any sort of slip up or failure, then we could be looking at, a pretty significant industry-wide crisis, because, kind of related to what we're talking about, the state of the industry at large and the state of the gaming landscape in terms of like what games are actually coming out and what games are people playing looks a lot different now than it did at this time during the PS4's life cycle. I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. I mean, for example, I think one of the biggest kind of differences is, and I was just taking a look at like Star Wars Outlaws as an example. So Star Wars Outlaws was not on old consoles, and it was bad. We've got all these other games that are coming out on new hardware, but they're not hitting the mark. They're not executing at all. And I can't remember specifically what was coming out. God, when did the PS4 even come out? Was it 2012?
That seems early.
PS4 release year.
2013.
I was 1 year off. So what, 2017 was 4 years in, roughly? God, what was coming out in 2017? I would have to Google that. But my point being is, I mean, AAA has been in a weird downward spiral for a while. We've been talking about it quite a bit on this show, but it was not to quite the same state that it's in right now. And also, more games were just coming out, I think, in general.
Horizon Zero Dawn.
The original? Yeah. Forbidden West is relatively recent. So yeah, Zero Dawn. Yeah, that was big.
I want to say Destiny 2 was 2017.
That would have been big.
The God of War was 2018.
Oh yeah, Destiny 2 was 2017. So yeah, that was
Last
big.
of Us Part 2 was 2020. But I mean, well, wait, hold on. Yeah, Red Dead 2 was 2018. So right in this same, pocket of time, there were a series of bona fide hits coming out. I think Uncharted 4 was not too far off in there. 2016. And I'm just kind of looking at PS4. But yeah, I mean, I think what we're kind of saying, this points to a larger problem with the release schedule of a lot of these games, and then the overall quality of them once they have come out, right? So if you look back at the PS4 generation as a whole, you not only saw the progression of tentpole IPs that people already knew and loved. You saw, sequels that were well received. You saw, and of course sold well, because those are two different things. You saw reboots to those franchises. God of War is a really good example. And then you saw, Spider-Man for the PS4 was an enormous hit. Generated a sequel that was an enormous hit for the PS5. The Last of Us Part 2 capped off the PS4's life cycle. Ghost of Tsushima was a new IP that came out and blew everyone away. Horizon Zero Dawn came out and blew a lot of people away. Not as many people, but a lot of people in many ways. And the PS5's life cycle has seen a lot more crickets.
Well, so here's a game that I didn't have this in the notes, but here's a game that I think will actually move the needle for a lot of people. And in reference to what you're talking about a game helping with consoles, Monster Hunter World came out in 2018 and was a fantastic experiment for Capcom, because Monster Hunter was a game that was typically something that was very Easternized. Like it was not good for Western audience. It was not as approachable. I shouldn't say it wasn't good. I liked it, but it was very complicated. It was very grindy. There were a lot of systems that you didn't see in traditionally Western games. They came out with World, where they Westernized it a lot. It became a massive success. Flash forward, I'm playing the Monster Hunter Wilds beta, which is the sequel to Worlds, and it's in an open beta right now. That game is beautiful. There is no way that can run on old hardware. It will only be on new hardware, and people will upgrade for that game. It will not be as big as GTA, but it is going to be, and just playing from the beta, it's going to attract new people. It is beautiful. It's so much better than World, and World was already great. So my point being is, hopefully we will continue to see really good high quality games in 2025. Like Monster Hunter. And that could help kind of bring up everybody a little bit.
Right.
But even with that being said, we're just mentioning 2 games out of, all these big budget, gorgeous games that have been coming out. The majority of the successful games that we've seen, Aaron, and we've also been talking about this a lot, it's not coming from AAA. It's coming from indie. It's coming from AA. And, similarly to Roblox and Fortnite, these games don't need particularly aggressive hardware, right? Like Among Us, there was BattleBit, there was, I almost said Killer Instinct. That's a fighting game. What was the one with the dance and the people in the hazmat suits that I'm blanking on right now? Where you went in and grabbed stuff. We talked about it. We literally talked about it on an episode.
I cannot remember even a little bit what it was called.
Well, anyway,
yeah, I mean,
these games all are baby graphics.
Yeah. I mean, much. Yeah, that's the fun pejorative way of phrasing it. But yes, a lot of the innovation and a lot of the really desirable games that have come out, even recently with like Metaphor, we see, and also the rise of the Yakuza franchise. We're routinely relying less on traditional AAA and Western AAA, Western like sensibility driven AAA games to kind of push player engagement, because you can blame it on the bloated development cycles. If you want, you can blame it on, people being creatively bankrupt. You can blame it on studios pushing for live service over standalone titles. You can, find a million different things to kind of point to why the slate of content itself is a little bit more sparse this time around. But the reality of it is the good games are still coming out. And like you said, Monster Hunter Wilds is going to sell systems. I don't think Star Wars Outlaws was barely capable of selling itself, much less systems. So that one was yet again kind of a big old whiff for Ubisoft, but it's possible that when Assassin's Creed Shadows actually releases, people will want to upgrade to play that. Because there is still, despite everything, a fair amount of fondness for the Assassin's Creed franchise. The same might be said for the new Ghost game coming out. That could end up... Because it's entirely possible that the conversation we're having right now about the sparse slate of content could end up feeling a little bit hollow in 2 years, depending on what happens. But at the same time, it's hard to deny that we're being drip fed as opposed to drowned in hits.
Here are things that have 100% plagued this most recent console generation, right? It is, as you mentioned, the horrific development times that are just becoming increasingly more unsustainable. The horrific quality of AAA games on average. On average, there's been good ones, but on average, they've not been great. And the rise of live service games. Those three things, I think, have been more unique to this recent console gen in terms of having an impact. Obviously, we saw the rise of live service games in the previous console generation, but I don't think that we saw the impact of it as much as we do now. And to the point of the long development times and why that matters, one of the comments that came up in the Adam Conover and Jason Schreier video was there's just not very many games that people view as being worth buying when it comes to at least AAA that are coming out as consistently. And part of that is because these games take so fucking long to develop. And that was not the case God, let's just go way back and talk about Xbox, right? Was it Xbox and PlayStation? I always get it. Is it PlayStation 2? Yeah, Xbox and PlayStation 2. Games are fucking coming out all the goddamn time because the scope was so much less and the development time was way less. So you could just pop games out at a much higher frequency, and there are still good games that came out during that time period that people love to this day and will play to this day. So they're getting remade now. Yeah. And there was a comment too about like a lack of exclusive. This is in the Adam Conover interview with Jason Schreier, a comment that a lack of exclusivity is part of what's driving this issue as well. I'm going to be real honest, at least from my perspective. I've always hated exclusivity. I think that Sony pushing games to PC is a good thing. I think Xbox not having exclusives to its console as much is a good thing. I think everyone should be able to play everything ideally. I will say I have less of an issue of people kind of getting kicked out of being able to experience a game because of hardware or software requirements. Like I think that's a reasonable expectation that, a game may just not be playable on your device. I understand that sucks, but also from a developer perspective, if you have to like have this thing run on your grandpa's phone from 2005, that's going to suck. Like no one enjoys that process.
You cannot ask developers to do the literally impossible, right? Just to appease the maximum number of players. I would agree by and large. I think exclusivity has, to a fairly strong degree, impacted hardware sales because, as you and I, Zach, had kind of discussed off mic, for one thing, PC players are growing in number. There are more people playing on PC actively as either their primary or one of their primary ways of interacting with video games than there have been in maybe ever. Steam is an incredibly popular marketplace, and as kind of proven by the recent release of Red Dead Redemption, a game that came out in like 2007, 2009, it finally released on PC like last week. PC players are surprisingly patient when it comes to waiting for stuff to come to them. And in a lot of cases, PC, despite the high cost to entry, is one of the most affordable ways to sustain a gaming habit, to put it in a weird kind of gambling way, because the prices tend to be much more reasonable on storefronts like Steam. So
well, it's not even just that. It's that you've got, and granted, this involves some level of education, but with a computer, you can gradually upgrade it. So the life expectancy of your computer and the performance can improve over time, and it can be relatively affordable. Comparing the PS5 Pro at $700 to like an equivalent PC, you're going to pay more for that computer, but also that computer does more for you. It's not just a gaming device. And so this is brought up in that interview as well. There seems to be an appetite. I mean, I can speak for myself. I love PC gaming now that I've fully moved over to it from console. But I think people have more of an appetite to spend money when it relates to building a computer or getting a computer. When it comes to just getting a console, there's less of that appetite, which is kind of interesting because you remember when they were trying to sell consoles as like being a multimedia platform? I feel like that just failed, and now it's just for games. Like, and I think because of that, it doesn't justify the higher price point.
No. I mean, the Xbox was trying to not be a game the Xbox One specifically was trying not to be a game console, but to be like a fully immersed multimedia, like a fully entrenched multimedia device. That would be your cable box and your video game console and your Blu-ray player. And that was either ahead of its time or just a bad idea. Because it abjectly failed in every conceivable way. So, and I don't think that the streaming element of something like that, because people have moved on from physical media by this point. Much to my chagrin, people have moved on from physical media. Having a Blu-ray player as part of your game console is no longer a selling point for the game console. And the streaming element is nothing because you can get a Fire Stick for $35. And people will use that because the interface is a little bit less clunky. You don't have to worry about, using a controller or purchasing a separate remote. It's just a much more streamlined sort of process. Yeah, so I think you're right. PC gaming is on the rise for all of those reasons, and that has impacted console sales. And then you'd think that would push not developers, but publishers to try and retain those exclusives for longer to try and drive console hardware sales. But we've actually seen the opposite happen, where they can't deny the value of the player base on PC. So we've actually seen the value of exclusives, and I'm speaking from the publisher perspective, distilled across multiple platforms, which I think is ultimately to the benefit of players and the industry at large, but it is to the detriment of having system-selling games. Which again brings us back to GTA, which either by design or out of necessity is a console exclusive in the sense that it will only release on consoles. Which means PC players are either going to have to be really patient because they will release an enormously successful PC version of it at some point. But at least for the time being, we do have a consoles exclusive game coming out. Something that is not going to reach the PC audience, that will force people, if they want to engage with it at launch, to purchase into the new generation of hardware. So do I think that is a good idea? No, I think it's a much better idea to have a lot of successful IPs and a lot of successful independent projects that all kind of collectively create a much more enjoyable gaming ecosystem rather than betting it all on one big horse. But they didn't ask me.
They didn't ask you. Yeah, it's depressing to see the lessons that are learned from experiences like this, because I can almost bet that this is going to, when GTA 6 almost inevitably is a good game. I will say almost inevitably. Because people are coming out with poopy bullshit all the time. Even companies that we think are good. So when it's almost inevitably a good game, I can almost guarantee you that this is going to be championed as a reason why these mega hit multi-million-dollar games are worth it. Because it's like, oh, look, GTA, single-handedly saved the games industry by selling 5 gajillion copy, whatever, generating
in an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's gonna be like praised in like how powerful these games are. It's like, sure, it took, tens of years to make. I actually don't know how long it's been in development. I haven't looked that up. But my point being is, like, this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable because
Right.
yes, it's cool and it's a like win if it wins, but the risk behind it, especially if you're betting the entirety of the health of the games industry on it, is absurd. And obviously these aren't calculations that like the team working on GTA are making. They're not trying to have this be this game that saves the game industry. This isn't a bet that like has been orchestrated and plotted over. But it's just so depressing to see executives, at least according to Jason Schreier and the reporting that he does, and we trust him, basically kind of be like, it'll be okay in 2025 because GTA will save us. It's like, maybe we should fix the structural issues around how all of this is unsustainable to actually fix the problems going on.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing that I think we can rely on routinely is that C-suite executives will learn the wrong lessons from success stories and failure stories in a lot of cases. And I think that GTA 6, I have no problem with GTA 6 coming out and being tremendously astronomically successful. I hope it is. I hope that the in the trenches developers who have put their blood, sweat, and tears into making this game in whatever capacity it has been in development since 2013 when GTA 5 came out, I hope that their hard work is rewarded with praise and fucking raises and living wages and reasonable hours. Like, I hope that it was a rewarding experience, and I hope that their hard work is appreciated. I hope that it does help the games industry. I hope that it does sell consoles. But in an ideal world, it would do all of those things in tandem with a healthy industry full of games also doing the same thing, just not on that scope, right? It's the fallacy that every single movie has to be Avengers Endgame, or every single movie has to be Titanic, or has to be Avatar, or has to be Star Wars. Because once you reach that understanding, that's what you budget for, that's what you plan for. And the content sparsity problem will get worse if that is the only lesson that's learned, is that you can make an insane amount of money by betting on these big 10-year games that will not only have, $2 billion in week one sales, but also, drive hundreds of millions of dollars of profit every single year for the rest of time until that game gets sunsetted and replaced by its successor. That, like Zach has said, is just so profoundly unsustainable as a model to base an entire industry off of, that I am concerned about the implications of GTA 6's almost inevitable success. That having been said, there are obviously companies that aren't going to go that way. There are still, for every one of these, you still have your FromSoft games, which seem largely to be made under humane conditions and with the idea of innovation and, design at the forefront. And they sell and they change the industry, and there's great stuff happening. Yakuza is on its way up while Assassin's Creed is on its way down. Monster Hunter is bridging the gap between East and West and bringing this massive franchise to 1 billion more people. And it's not like the industry is over if they learn the wrong lessons from GTA 6, but in my opinion, if they learn the wrong lessons from GTA 6, in 10 years, we will still be having this conversation, but it'll be worse.
Well, I think the other thing, and we didn't do a great job of hitting on this originally, and this kind of leads me to a bit of a profound thought, is really the reason that these forever games or black hole games, as you had said earlier, are kind of problematic. That there's such an emphasis on these is that they're not competing just for your dollars. They're competing for your time, because as I mentioned, time in game equals more money spent. And there's only so many hours in the day. We only have so many hours of the day. We cannot make more time like you can make more money, right? And when that's what you're competing over, it it basically could lead, if it spiraled enough, to a situation where there's fewer and fewer games out there because there's no room for any other game to exist because people don't have time to play other games. And that's not a good place to be in. That's not a healthy space. And the profound thought that I had, Aaron, you remember when like the metaverses were all really big idea-wise?
Yeah.
It just occurred to me why those are big. It's because if everyone is just playing a single game like Fortnite, well, then the only way to have different experiences is to make the game like Fortnite a metaverse because everyone's only playing Fortnite. So you have to have games within the game to have other kind of games exist because no one's going to look elsewhere.
Exactly.
And I hadn't really thought about that full circle before, but like that honestly is another huge unhealthy thing in my opinion, because, and I don't know how much this will happen, but like the more people just lock onto a specific service, like other games can't exist. There's not enough attention.
Yeah. The ultimate goal in owning both your time and providing the place where you will spend your money, the things on which you will spend your money, the goal there is to turn your game into the platform that allows other games to be playable, right? Because if you can capitalize on that, which is one of the reasons that like the UE5 editor for Unreal is potentially such a game changer once we start seeing the full implications of that take shape.
You mean UEFN? You're talking about Unreal Engine for Fortnite.
Yeah.
Okay. You said the UE editor for Unreal, and
that's nothing. That's nothing. It apparently a UE editor for Unreal is uneven editor. No. UEFN. Once that starts to take shape, the implications of that, will potentially bring the industry closer to looking like what you're talking about, which, even though I have my gripes with the book and even more with the movie, is very increasingly like a Ready Player One situation, which is not appealing to me. But if they can turn Fortnite the game into a profitable platform for other publishers to have their games be accessible only through Fortnite, that opens up, different marketplaces. It opens up different, plugin. There's a million different directions that could go, all of which result in exactly what you're talking about, where there is like one or two games. And then the rest of it's just not getting the resources it needs, because there are only so many dollars out there. There are only so many hours in the day, and there are only so many resources that can be allocated to development. And ultimately, no matter what someone in a big corner office says about wanting to do right by the players, they want to do right by the players only insofar as that increases their brand equity. They want to do right by the players only insofar as it results in players spending more money because they are more loyal to your brand. That is the goal. And the artistic integrity of that product is of secondary or tertiary value to them. So, it's spooky to see that we might move in that direction. Obviously, we're extrapolating out a little bit far, outside of the purview of like GTA 6 and what it aims to achieve as a game of its own. But the profundity of what Zach has said is still worth taking note of, I'd say. Yep.
Well, with all that positivity, I think it's probably time for us to close the door on this episode, so to speak. But before we do that, we have some thank yous to say. And
we do.
Of course, my first thank you will be to eDougie Art. eDougie Art is the wonderful artist behind our album art and general color scheme. We appreciate them greatly, and you should too. So make sure to check them out on Etsy under eDougie Art. And they actually recently changed their Instagram handle without us knowing. So it's actually now at Moss Cat Market on Instagram. So sorry that it's not the same thing. We don't control our friends, nor should we.
nor should we. Yeah, and Moss Cat is, of course, MOSS, and then, like a cat, and then a market where one could purchase moss or a cat.
Exactly.
I'm assuming is the design behind that. But as the world remains in flux, names change, things come, things go. The constant we always have in our hearts and our ears is Beach Girl. Although that's not entirely true. I actually just went on a Beach Girl binge, and they've done some crazy genre hopping recently, which I actually find really interesting. But yes, Beach Girl is the provider of our phenomenal intro and outro music, and the purveyor of great tunes that you can listen to. Check them out on SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, YouTube, just about anywhere you can find great digital music and some pretty shitty stuff. But don't look in the shitty section for Beach Girl. You can find Beach Girl on those platforms, so do so and enjoy.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. As always, we appreciate it, and make sure to have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I did like the hot chocolate once. It was disgusting. It's bad for my guts. I don't need that in my life.